Hello and good day. On behalf of the Center for Student Success and Intervention, I am happy to welcome you to SIPA and more broadly, Columbia University. I'm here to discuss with you a little bit more about student conduct. But before I go into that, I wish to give you a little overview of the Center for Student Success and Intervention. So, first and foremost, our mission. The Center for Student Success and Intervention uses a 360-degree lens approach to our work with students. To best serve Columbia students, we collaborate with our campus and community partners to provide supportive measures for students experiencing challenges, including unmet basic needs and navigating the university student conduct process. Here's a little bit about our vision. As a center, we are committed to our students' academic success. Using best practices and our own expertise, we collaborate with campus partners to enhance students' learning, growth, and critical thinking skills. We provide educational opportunities, supportive interventions, and collaborative programming for students to succeed in their time at Columbia through upholding our three values, which are students, integrity, and JEDI. JEDI stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. This is a brief snapshot of our welcome page on our website. And here are some of the resources in which we do offer. At the top of the screen, you will notice our web address, cssi.columbia.edu. Feel free to navigate there at your leisure to get more familiar with our resources and our page. So if you ever need to report a concern or have questions about things regarding conduct process or any other resources that we offer, you'll be familiar with what our page outline looks like and where to go specifically. So as you can see, we have information about the food pantry. You can learn a little bit more about our policies, university policies, as well as your own school-specific policies. If there's ever an issue you're having with another peer, faculty member, or just something of concern, here's where you go to report it. Then here's a little bit about navigating our process, some FAQs, and then you can learn about our case management and how we support students from the moment they arrive to when they graduate. So I'm here today to delve into talk more specifically about student conduct. So in student conduct, we refer to our conduct process as the Dean's Discipline process. The student conduct team that I'm a part of, we facilitate restorative conversations with students documented for alleged violations of university policies, divided into two main categories. The first is behavioral. Some examples of potential behavioral violations or expectations that are unmet are disruptive behavior, endangerment, unauthorized access. And then we have our second category, which is academic integrity, and some examples of expectations or potential violations of policy are plagiarism, unauthorized collaboration, and cheating. We have several others for both categories. My recommendation to you is to definitely go to our website and review all of our expectations and potential policies that could be potentially violated, as there are definitions, specific definitions in which we utilize to determine if a student in fact violated a policy or not. Now, during the Dean Discipline process, our main goal is to facilitate a restorative conversation with students. How does that look? Well, first, we try to educate student on the policy and community expectations. And then we try to identify the cause of the behavior, what led the student to decide to engage in poor behavior. And then finally, we seek to connect students with the resources and support needed to navigate a similar situation in the future, or to help them process through what they may be going through currently, which led to them participating in behavior that was counterproductive to them being successful at Columbia. And then what's important to understand is that we have partnership with colleagues. These partners we provide consultation on situations before reporting. Then we assist, support, and follow up with students. This way we can offer robust supportive measures because each student may have different things in which they're navigating, and our office can tap into those resources and streamline it for the student depending on their needs. So Columbia University Code of Conduct and SIPA Professional Expectations. It's important that you read up on this. This is be found on our website, and then the SIPA's professional expectations can be found on the SIPA's website. But specifically, if you go to cssi.columbia.edu and you go to Standards and Discipline Policy, you will find a PDF document which pretty much outlines our entire process from beginning to end on what you can expect, what are your rights, what are our expectations as hearing officers, and what are the resources afforded to you from the beginning to the very end of a Dean's discipline process. So again, I encourage you at your leisure to find your way to the website and to navigate it, and more importantly, read the Standards and Discipline document. Now, just kind of share with you all, a couple of trends that we've noticed over the past year and a half or so. From an academic standpoint, we've seen an uptick or more likely report of unauthorized collaboration and/or assistance. We've seen plagiarism and we've seen cheating. Again, as I mentioned, I'll go into a little bit more later on, but students decide to engage in these behaviors for various different reasons, all in which I find most times can be addressed if they sought out support, either from their professor or from the TA or from their advisor ahead of time. They could have potentially put things in place or received an accommodation or received an extension to some extent to where they may not have needed to engage in some of these behaviors that can be detrimental to their educational goals. Recent trends and reports, increasing use of AI, specifically the use of ChatGPT. I want you to know, you hear it from me, ChatGPT being used for any type of academic work, it's best to refrain from doing so unless you explicitly get permission from your professor. You may want to use it to help you because English is your second language and you don't feel as confident with your written work. But again, you're utilizing it. What you have to understand is that even if you know that other students are utilizing it, the usage of ChatGPT does give you an unfair advantage, especially if the professor did not give you explicit directives to utilize this software. All right. Then there's plagiarism relating to not knowing how to cite and find sources properly. I think at your earliest convenience, you should make your way to the library and speak with the librarian and learn about the numerous resources that can help you with citing your work and keeping the work in which you're sourcing in order so that you can cite properly before you complete your paper so that you don't inadvertently plagiarize someone else's work and not give credit where the credit is due. And then one big one, because again, we're just a very helpful community, is sharing of course material. You need to understand that when you're taking a course, the material shared with you by your professor was shared with you by your professor. And that material should not be shared with anyone else who's not taking the course. Even if you know that that student may be taking the course the following semester, they need to wait until the professor releases the material to them for them to be in possession of it. The best way to understand this is that the course material provided to you by your professor is intellectual property. Unless you get permission from your professor to share it, you are in fact infringing on sharing their intellectual property. And that is an issue, that is a concern. Also, by doing so, you are offering the student or your peer who you're sharing this material with an unfair advantage, because then they get to read material or start preparing for a course well in advance, which other students who will take in that course at a later date won't necessarily have that same advantage. All right. So when you're thinking of doing anything and you want to know whether or not it's the right thing to do or not, think of it in terms of, am I giving someone else an unfair advantage? Am I giving myself an unfair advantage? I recognize that you're in an educational setting, one in which you've done a lot of work to get here. And so there is this competitive element to it. But while you're a Columbia student, the competitiveness should not drive you to make decisions that subsequently undercut the reason for your being here, which is the learning, which is the sharing of ideas and creating original work. So some trends in behavioral reports that we receive. So disruptive behavior, on-campus housing, alcohol, noise, fire safety, access, egress, and lastly, wellness concerns. If you're living off campus, whether that be Columbia residential housing or your own housing in which you've gained accommodations through your own search for apartments, it's important to be mindful that while you may not live in Columbia housing, that you are still a Columbia student. And so we are to receive reports that you may have violated particular expectations of your landlord, or things that kind of still fit in the description of expectations we have for our students. We have the discretion to move forward with a dean's discipline process. But more importantly, this is more so if you're visiting someone and you decide that you want to go on to their fire escape or to the roof and you don't have permission to do so. Again, think about safety. Think about the nature of our office is to maintain the health and safety of our community, which is why we have these particular rules and regulations and expectations in place, because these rules and regulations help mitigate as much as possible something from going wrong if all parties adhere to it. When it comes to wellness concerns, please, again, as I mentioned earlier, with that report of concern, if you have a roommate, a neighbor, a classmate, someone that you fear may be spiraling or struggling with life, that you will say something, you'll report it, so that the university can engage with that student and offer the resources available to them, which is afforded to them because of the tuition that they pay. So just keep that in mind, that we all community members, we all should be looking out for one another, and we all need to do our part in that. Some recent trends and reports, an increase in conflict management, social media and messaging platforms, as well as harassment. I want to touch on this in respects to, freedom of speech. As a student, as a citizen, you have the right to say whatever you want to say. What I would caution you, though, is to keep in mind, how are you saying or how are you presenting your idea? And how are you seeking for it to be received? So just because you say something that is inappropriate doesn't necessarily mean we're going to initiate a conduct, but we may wish to meet with you to kind of get a better idea of what's happening where what you're doing seems to be causing a ripple effect in how your peers see you, how your faculty and staff see you, and if that's actually what you want to have occur. We will not infringe on your ability to say and express how you feel. We will just communicate and have a dialogue about, are you receiving the results in which you are intending to? And then discuss, are there ways, alternative ways for you to actually address the issues that are of concern to you in a much more productive way. As it pertains to harassment, it's very important that you understand the difference between it's your freedom to say what you like versus bombarding someone or harassing them in a way in which creates an environment that is not conducive for learning. All right. So again, read our policy, which is on our website, so that you can have the specific definition of what harassment is and not your definition, because your definition may not necessarily quantify what harassment is as it pertains to if you are to be alleged to have violated our harassment policy. We will be holding you accountable for what we have in writing, not what you think the actual definition of harassment is. So it's important to understand that. And this is your code of academic and professional conduct specifically for SIPA. I'm not going to read through this. I encourage you to read through this. This is located on your website. This is very important information so you know how to conduct yourself as a SIPA college student. In the event you are not to adhere to this, your faculty and staff do have the authority to submit a report identifying that they believe that you have not upheld your agreement to abide by this professional conduct. And we do have the authority to initiate a dean's discipline process for you not adhering to the expectations outlined in this professional conduct statement. So meeting with our office. When you receive a notice from our office, a lot of emotions may arise. And so I want to kind of address some myths. Should we receive a report alleging that you violated a policy, the following will occur. As a student, you'll be notified that there's a dean's discipline hearing that will be scheduled. As a student, you have the right to review the file and any information that was submitted with the initial report that led to us submitting to you a notice which will have the charges outlined. You will then have the ability to submit a written statement to us in advance so that we can have a better understanding of your perspective before we meet. You're not obligated to do so. However, in my experience, students who do submit written statements in advance are setting themselves up for a much more productive and engaging conversation during the hearing. In addition, it helps with the students' nerves and makes sure that they touch on all points that they want to address regarding the situation versus coming to the hearing with no prepared notes. And you may then forget to share something that's very important to us better understanding your point of view. Now, when students attend the hearing, there will be staff members. There will either be one CSI staff member along with a representative from SIPA. Those two individuals will make up the hearing panel. They will ask questions and they will ultimately determine if the student is responsible or not responsible, and then ultimately determine what is the most appropriate sanction in the event that they find the student responsible. It will be the CSSI staff member who will be sending the decision letter to the student. In that letter, it will identify what you've been found responsible for or not responsible for, what the sanction that was determined will be, along with an appeal process, along with deadlines that need to be met in order for the appeal process to move forward, as well as any deadlines as it relates to the sanctions and when they end and when they begin. Now, should a student appeal within the deadline, our office receives that appeal request. We then forward that information over to the dean of your school. The dean of your school will then ultimately determine to either uphold our decision as the hearing panel or to modify it. When the dean decides to modify a sanction, that means that the sanction can go up or the sanction can be reduced. There are some cases where the dean can also send the case back to CSSI for further review. So technically there's three options that an appeal can render. Ultimately, whatever the dean determines is final. So if a dean increases a sanction or reduces a sanction, that is the final. If the dean decides to send it back to the CSSI office for further review, then another hearing will take place along with two new hearing officers. In the event that that doesn't happen, as stated, the final decision that the dean renders means that the case is resolved and whatever was determined is final. Here are the potential outcomes. There are 5: disciplinary warning, conditional disciplinary probation, disciplinary suspension, and expulsion. When we're dealing with a behavioral matter, all 5 outcomes are available. When we are adjudicating, dealing with an academic integrity matter, the 3 outcomes in blue are primarily utilized. We start at disciplinary probation for academic integrity violations. If there are severe mitigating circumstances, we do have the discretion to issue conditional disciplinary probation. We do not issue disciplinary warning for any responsible findings for academic integrity. Please be aware that if we do determine to issue disciplinary suspension or expulsion, we do not reach those outcomes easily. It takes a lot for us to determine that you should be separated from the university. And just to kind of elaborate on the 2 differences, suspension is a temporary separation and expulsion is a permanent separation. Our goal in our process is to be educational. Just to be clear, there are times where suspension is necessary as the education that needs to occur is more likely to happen away from the educational environment. And so that's when the suspension will be determined to be most appropriate, with the understanding that after that student is away from the university for a duration of time, they will then be best fit to come back and return to complete their studies and be more prone to be successful moving forward. Promoting self-care. This is a very key component, I believe, so please take notes if you do have pen and paper or take out your phone at this point in time. I believe these elements I'll be discussing will likely help prevent you from ever having to engage with our office via a dean's discipline process. So, causes of behavior and reasons in which students may engage in behavior that they ordinarily wouldn't have. For example, plagiarism or collaborating, unauthorized, or cheating. Things in which I believe, and I think my colleagues believe as well, that Columbia students specifically do not come to Columbia with the intent to cheat. That each, every one of you specifically have come because you enjoy learning and you are embarking upon this new chapter of your life to gain information so that you can go out in the world and do something wonderful. However, life happens. And so when we talk about one of the first things that's on the screen, time and or stress management, very key in being able to effectively manage your time and or stress. A lack of doing so can result into you feeling overwhelmed and then taking a shortcut, which leads you to violating the academic integrity expectations. The second one, not aware of the policy expectations. Well, you've already been informed and encouraged to read the policy and expectations. Not knowing will not shield you from being held accountable. So again, for the second or third time, I will highly recommend you read the policies and the standards of discipline, as well as peruse through your website, SIPA website, to learn what the professional conduct expectations is and any additional expectations your specific school has for you. All right. Um, as it pertains to your professor's expectations, um, I encourage you to read the syllabus thoroughly and ask any clarifying questions that you need to, even if you believe it's a dumb question. It's always best to get clarity and get clarified answers so that you don't make decisions that are not informed. I recognize that each of you may have taken a different path to get here. And so you may have built in habits of being, you know, self reliant, responsible. You know, you may be the person in your family that everyone comes to because you have it all together, or so they think you do. I would encourage you to start now, as soon as possible, developing the skill set of asking for help when you need it. It's important to ask for help immediately before things begin to spiral, because it's at that point in which your advisor, your TA, your professor is more equipped to help you navigate the situation versus after you've already made the poor decision. Now, the last one, the fact of navigating imposter syndrome. I just simply want to tell you all that thousands of students apply to be in the seat that you currently have. And so you were selected, which means that someone saw something in you, which means that you deserve to be here. And I would encourage you to write that down somewhere, that you deserve to be here. I would encourage you all to tell each other that every once in a while in your small groups that you create, that you all deserve to be here. The idea that you don't feel as though you belong to be here, those ideas may frequently come into your mind. I just want you to remember what I'm saying as far as someone else could have been selected, but they weren't. So this is your time. This is your moment. This is your new chapter. Take advantage of it and realize that you are amongst a community. You are in a position to create community. And so I hope that you move forward and you do so, and you don't let this idea of you not belonging get in the way of you completing and achieving your purpose. Now, I want to talk about student mindset. You will experience a high level of stress. Some of you may be navigating family life, working, and school. And some of you may just be dealing with school, but the work is going to be intense. It's going to push you. It's going to take you to the next level of honing those skills. So when you leave Columbia, you'll be ready to tackle what's ahead. So go knowing that the stress will be there, but it's now important for you to find ways to de-stress. What does that look like? Is that going to the gym? Is that taking time to unwind? It goes back to what I mentioned earlier about managing your time and managing your stress. One thing that I've noticed over the past few years is the discomfort in having hard conversations with peers. Whether you're an adult or you're a non-traditional student, but it doesn't really matter what your age is. Everyone may have different levels of comfort as it pertains to, as some may call it, being confrontational or being direct. My encouragement to you all is to again recognize that you're all here in this space and environment, a part of this community, because there's learning that is desired. And so to give people grace and give people the benefit of the doubt that they do not mean the worst. And so ask those clarifying questions. Don't make assumptions. And that goes to having the conversation versus making an assumption that someone did something or said something for a negative purpose or reason. And the reason why I mention this is because if you don't deal with it or address it head on, it then can create something that escalates just to find out later that you've been spending time on a thought or an action or someone's words longer than you needed to because it wasn't meant to be what you thought it was. So just ask for the clarifying questions, direct it head on. And then if you are incapable of doing that at the moment, find someone that you trust to be a mediator, whether it be your advisor, the TA, or the professor. And this is specifically if you're having any issues within a group setting for a project or something of that nature. Oops, sorry about that. One other thing I wanted to address is this aspect of getting in trouble and you're not used to getting in trouble. I don't typically use those terms when I'm meeting with students about conduct. It's not about getting in trouble. It's about recognizing that no one's perfect. We all make mistakes. We all stumble. It's about helping people get back up, recalibrating, right? Sometimes you need to stumble or fall to remember why you're doing it, right? Sometimes you may get complacent. Sometimes you may take your foot off the pedal. And it's in those moments where you do something that you typically wouldn't. Our office is here to help you get back in alignment with why you chose Columbia and what you want to do with your life. All right. So just keep that in mind. As it pertains to academic integrity, I encourage you to prioritize your time management and self care. As I said, ask questions if unclear about any expectations, what materials you can use, who you can collaborate with. Can you use AI or other online resources? And the Columbia comparison culture, it's a real thing, but it's also inaccurate. And what I mean by that is that you may think everyone else around you is just smarter than you, or you may think everyone around you is getting great grades and they're doing it with ease. Everyone has their strengths and everyone has their areas of improvement. You're no different. So what I like to share with students is tunnel vision. Not tunnel vision or not being open-minded about ideas or topics of discussion, things like that, but tunnel vision regarding not comparing yourself to another student and what you think that they're getting grade-wise or what you think that they're learning or an advantage that you think that they have. This is your race. You run it at your pace, and you're going to get the results that you deserve, that you earned. When you try to run someone else's race at someone else's pace, that's when you find yourself tripling and stumbling, and you may end up in our office discussing that because you decided to do something out of the ordinary, which led you to this moment. And my hope is that each of you are here today because you have been acting with integrity all along. You've been doing your own work all along. You've been creating original content all along. There's no reason to stop doing that now because you believe someone else to your left or to your right may be a little bit further along than you are. The last thing you want to do is do something where you create a further gap because you have to take time away because you get separated, or you have to repeat a course because you didn't pass because you cheated. That's a true separation, right? That doesn't have to be if you make the right decisions. So just keep that in mind. From a behavioral standpoint, prioritize self-management and self-care. Again, use campus resources available to you to assist you. For example, the counseling center, for example, the gym, when it goes back to stress management, Dodge Gym, um, the writing center, the library, just to name a few. Address conflict early, as I mentioned. Listen to understand and not to respond. There's a book I would like to reference, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Um, if you haven't read the book, I encourage you to read it. If you don't know that terminology, it's definitely available online. But again, I think it's very important that as you engage interpersonally with people, that it's not all about them understanding you, but you also listening to understand their perspective. Because once they hear you listening and understanding them, then they're open to listening and understanding you. And then you may be able to resolve the conflict. Again, I want to highlight, if you believe that you're unable to do this by yourself, do not hesitate or don't think less of yourself for asking someone to help intervene and be a mediator to mediate the situation. Addressing the conflict is most important versus how you look regarding addressing. And I say that to mean you will not be thought less of by having someone come to help assist you with addressing the conflict. As it pertains to interpersonal dialogue, it's my experience that students who decide to have tough conversations via text or social media platforms is more likely that the person on the other end is going to misinterpret your language. Excuse me, your language, the context, and thereby escalating the matter. So, as much as possible, if you can, have the hard conversations in person in real time. For those who live with others, I encourage you to visit and revisit roommate and community agreements. Again, be mindful that as someone new to an environment, area in New York City, even if you have lived here before, if you're living with someone new, there may be a certain agreement that you have. Be open to that agreement evolving. For example, you may agree that there'll be no visitors on the weekends. And that may be because you may not currently have a significant other. But then as the weeks go on and people start to meet and people start to open up and get comfortable, they may start to date. But then you've already agreed that you can't have significant others over. Be open to going back to the original agreement and making modifications. Doing so ahead of time before you actually start the new behavior. So, for example, if you start dating someone and you plan on having them over to spend the night, but you know that the agreement was already stated that there'll be no one spending the night on specific dates and times, go to your roommate and say, hey, can we amend this agreement? And here's why. And see if there could be some compromise. And then go from there. Versus just doing it in hopes that your roommate will just understand. They likely will, but in the event that they don't, you secondly violated the agreement and you were inconsiderate about checking in with them as far as how they may feel about it. So it goes back to dealing with conversations face to face, not making assumptions, and having those hard conversations in person. That is the end of my presentation. If you have questions, please feel free to email them. Our email address is studentconduct@columbia.edu. Again, our email address is studentconduct@columbia.edu.